title. The address, nobody kept. There is a particular kind of courage that flourishes only in youth, the courage of people who have not yet learned what fear is for. In the summer of 1989, 3 teenagers drove a borrowed truck down a dirt road outside Corsicana, Texas, chasing the ghost of a dead man. They believed, as the young always believe, that the worst things in the world happen to other people in other places, in some dimmer and more careless version of reality than the one they personally inhabited. They were wrong, of course, but the nature of their wrongness, that is something the Twilight Zone invites you to consider very carefully. The truck belonged to Danny Pruett's Uncle Ray, who was allegedly fishing at Lake Navarro, but was actually sleeping off a 3-day drunk in the cab of his own vehicle 12 miles away. This was the kind of luck that the summer of 1989 dealt in sloppy and accidental and warm as engine exhaust. Danny drove because it was his uncle's truck and therefore, by the sovereign logic of 16-year-old boys, his birthright to do so. He had his learner's permit and a confidence that exceeded it by approximately 40 miles per hour. He sat with one wrist draped over the steering wheel, his other arm crooked out the window into the thick July air. Wearing a Metallica shirt he'd cut the sleeves off and a pair of Wranglers with a hole in the left knee that he'd worried open over the course of 2 school years. Beside him, in the middle, sat Kara Voss. Kara was the reason the 3 of them were out here at all, though she would have resisted the accusation. She'd brought the article, a photocopy of a piece from Texas Monthly, 2 years old now, that her older cousin had given her as a joke birthday present, along with a Ouija board and a bottle of strawberry wine cooler. The article was titled, "The Road Back to Nowhere, Revisiting the Slaughter County Killings." Kara had read it 4 times. She knew the killer's name, Raymond Earl Pruett. No relation to Danny, a fact she had confirmed twice because Danny's reaction the first time had been priceless, and she knew the county road number and the approximate location of the farmhouse where Pruett had lived before his arrest in 1984. She had drawn a map in the margin of her notebook. She had brought a flashlight, a disposable camera, and a small handheld tape recorder that she told herself was for capturing EVP, which she'd read about in a library book on paranormal investigation. The real reason she'd brought it was that she wanted to be the kind of person who brought a tape recorder to a place like this. On the passenger side, door rattling against his shoulder blade with every pothole, sat Marcus Webb. Marcus was the tallest of the 3 and the most skeptical and the one most likely to remind the other 2, at intervals, that Raymond Earl Pruett had been executed by the state of Texas in February of 1987, that he was therefore dead and not haunting anything, and that the real danger out here was County Road 1417 in the dark, with a driver whose hours behind the wheel numbered somewhere in the single digits. "There's no such thing as ghosts," Marcus said, for what Kara counted as the 4th time since they'd turned off the main highway. "You've mentioned that?" she said. "I'm establishing a baseline." "A baseline for what? For when you 2 get scared and I have to be the rational one?" Danny laughed. He had a big, loose laugh that belonged to someone twice his age, a laugh that had been borrowed from his Uncle Ray, the same way he'd borrowed the truck. "You're already scared, Mark. That's what all the talking is." "I'm not scared of a dead man's empty house." "You said it 4 times, Kara said, about the ghosts, because you keep implying there might be some." The truck bucked over a cattle guard and all 3 of them went briefly airborne. The headlights swept across a barbed wire fence, a tipped mailbox with no numbers on it, a live oak tree draped in something that might have been Spanish moss or might have been old plastic bags gone gray with weather and time. The road had been narrowing for the last 10 minutes in the way that certain roads do in rural Texas, not by design but by neglect. The shoulders slowly reclaiming themselves, grasses and cedar scrub pressing inward, as though the land were trying to swallow its own infrastructure. Kara looked at her notebook map. "Slow down. There should be a turnoff. Gravel. On the left. Might not have a sign." "There's no way your cousin's old magazine article." "My cousin's old magazine article had a photograph of the road. Marcus, I can read a photograph." Danny slowed to 10 miles an hour. The engine complained. Ahead of them. The headlights found exactly what Kara had promised. A gravel turnoff on the left, unpaved, disappearing into a tree line that closed over it like hands folding in prayer. For a moment, nobody said anything. "That's it," Kara said. "Could be a private drive," Marcus offered. But his voice had changed in some small way that neither of them commented on. "Private drive to what?" Danny said. "There's nothing out here." He turned left. The gravel ended after about 40 yards and became bare dirt packed hard as asphalt from decades of use that had long since ceased. The tree line on either side was mostly post oak and cedar elm, with the occasional pecan tree standing massive and black against the deep purple of the summer sky. There were no lights anywhere, no farmhouses in the distance, no radio towers blinking red, none of the ambient glow that hangs over small Texas towns, even on their quietest nights. It was as though they had driven beyond the reach of the electrical grid entirely, into some anterior version of the county that had been waiting here, unchanged, while the 20th century finished its business elsewhere. The farmhouse appeared in the headlights without warning, or rather, it appeared to have always been there, and the headlights simply arrived at the correct angle to reveal it. It was a 2-story structure that had once been white, but was now the color of old bone, its paint gone to long vertical strips that curled away from the siding like the mold of something enormous. The porch roof sagged at its left corner, where a support post had rotted through and leaned against the railing like a man who'd had too much to drink and couldn't quite find his footing. 2 windows on the upper floor caught the headlights and held them briefly, twin rectangles of reflected glare that made the house look awake. Danny cut the engine. The headlights died. The dark came down so completely and so fast that all 3 of them flinched. "Flashlight," Marcus said. His voice was perfectly steady, and Kara noted this and understood that steadiness of voice in situations like this was its own kind of fear response, the clamping down, the deliberate control. She clicked the flashlight on. Its beam was good fresh batteries she'd put in that afternoon, and it caught the house in a focused oval of yellow-white light that made the shadows around it seem to deepen in response. They sat in the truck without moving for what might have been 30 seconds, or might have been 3 minutes. "Okay," Danny said. "We're here." "We're here," Kara agreed. "Cool," Marcus said. "We've seen it. Very creepy old abandoned house. Let's go home." "We're going in," Kara said. "Kara." "I didn't drive 45 minutes on a dirt road to look at a house from a truck, Marcus." "We're going in." She was already out the door by the time either of them answered, which was the move she'd planned to commit so completely that extraction becomes socially impossible. It was the same technique she used when she wanted to swim in the deep end of the lake before she'd fully talked herself into it. Just go. The fear is always worse in the anticipation. The air outside the truck was different from the air they'd been driving through. It wasn't cooler, if anything it was the same dense, humid weight of a Texas July, but it smelled different, like clay that had been in shadow for a long time, like water under a porch. She couldn't name it exactly. She swept the flashlight across the yard, which was overgrown with something low and tough that grabbed at her sneakers, and then up to the porch steps. The boys followed. Of course, they followed. This was the geometry of their friendship. Kara moved first. Marcus provided the counter-argument. Danny held the middle. It had been this way since 6th grade. The porch steps held their weight, though the third one flexed in a way that made Marcus murmur something under his breath. The front door was open, or had been open long enough that the distinction between open and simply gone no longer applied. It hung at an angle from one hinge. The wood warped and gray. A large section of the lower panel kicked through at some point in the past, leaving a ragged hole that the dark inside the house breathed out through. Kara pushed the door fully open and stepped in. The first thing she noticed was the wallpaper, or what had been wallpaper. A floral pattern in yellows and greens that had been applied with such apparent enthusiasm and such poor quality adhesive that it had separated from the walls in long, curling sheets and lay in drifts across the floor like leaves after a bad autumn. Beneath it, the walls were bare plaster, stained in long brown lines where water had traveled down from the roof. The room was a parlor of some kind, with a brick fireplace on the far wall and the remains of furniture, a couch frame with the cushions gone to mold and collapse, a wooden chair with 2 legs still standing and 2 legs splayed, a side table with a lamp on it that looked grotesquely as though it might still work if you could find somewhere to plug it in. "Raymond Earl Pruett killed 9 people, Kara said. Her voice was quiet, but not a whisper. She didn't want to whisper between 1979 and 1984. He buried some of them on the property. The article said they found remains in the storm cellar and in the field behind the house. "I know," Marcus said. "I read the article too after you kept leaving it on the lunch table. Then, this is historically significant." Historically significant is a stretch for a farmhouse that belonged to a serial killer. People do tours of the Manson house. The Manson house is a mansion in Los Angeles. This is a rotting shack in Navarro County. Danny was moving through the room with a kind of slow, even attention that was unusual for him. He was generally a person of quick movements and distracted energy, but here he moved like he was reading something, his eyes going methodically to the walls, the floor, the ceiling. He stopped at the fireplace and crouched down, looking at something inside the hearth. "There's stuff in here," he said. Kara moved the flashlight over his shoulder. Inside the fireplace, half buried under a fall of mortar and old ash, was a collection of objects that had been there long enough to become part of the space. A rusted tin can, some kind of belt or harness buckle, a stack of papers gone to pulp, and this was the thing Danny was looking at, what appeared to be a child's shoe, a small saddle shoe, white and black, lying on its side in the ash with its mouth pointing up at them. None of the victims had been children. Kara knew this, but knowing it didn't prevent what she felt, which was something cold that started at the base of her neck and moved down. "We should look at the upstairs," she said. "No," Marcus said. "We should absolutely not look at the upstairs. The floors up there could be compromised. This whole structure is probably condemned. It's been standing for 50 years. 50 years of Texas summers and no maintenance, Kara, but Danny was already at the stairs. The second floor was 3 rooms, 2 bedrooms and a bathroom where the fixtures had been removed, leaving only the ghost shapes of where a toilet and sink had stood, still visible in the discoloration of the linoleum. The smaller bedroom, a child's room once, or a room that had been used as one, given the rusted remains of a twin bed frame and the faded outline on the wall where a poster or painting had hung for years, its frame, catching the sun long enough to bleach the paint around it to a slightly different shade, contained nothing of note. The larger room had been Pruett's, presumably. It contained a metal bed frame with a bare mattress spring that had somehow survived everything. The metal rusted to a deep red orange, and a wooden dresser with all its drawers missing. On the wall above the dresser, someone had used a marker or a crayon to write something, and the years had faded it, but not erased it entirely. Kara brought the flashlight close. "They still talk some mediums." "What does that mean?" Danny said. "I don't know," Kara said. The article mentioned something about Pruett that he claimed to hear voices. That was part of his defense. He said the land itself was telling him to do things. "The land," Marcus said. "That's what he said. The land told him to murder 9 people. I'm not defending the man, Marcus. I'm telling you what he claimed." Marcus stood in the doorway of the room with his arms crossed and his back carefully against the door frame, not leaning on the wall itself. Kara noticed as though some part of him didn't want to be in full contact with any surface in this house. She found this interesting. She filed it. She took her tape recorder out of her pocket and pressed record. "August 4th, 1989, she said quietly into the recorder. "We're in the bedroom of the Pruett farmhouse, Navarro County. There's writing on the wall." She read the words again. "They still talk sometimes." She let a silence sit on the tape. Then, "If there's anyone here who wants to say something, now would be a good time." "Oh God," Marcus said. "It doesn't hurt anything. It's embarrassing is what it is, only if someone's watching." "I'm watching." She held the tape recorder toward the center of the room and let it run. The silence in the house was its own thing, not the neutral absence of sound, but something with texture, the way that the silence of a room where something terrible has happened carries a residue. Kara had expected this intellectually, but the actual experience of it was different from the expectation, as actual experiences always are. Then she heard it, not through the tape recorder, not through the walls. It came from directly below them, a sound that started low enough to be subterranean and rose incrementally, like a voice finding its own pitch. It was rhythmic, almost, something between a hum and a groan. All 3 of them stopped moving simultaneously. The sound lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Then it stopped. Then it came again, from a different part of the floor below, further away toward the back of the house. "That's the wind," Marcus said. His arms had uncrossed. "There's no wind tonight," Danny said. This was true. The drive out had been through perfectly still air. The grasses along the road unmoved, everything sealed under the humid weight of the cloudless dark. The sound came a 3rd time, and this time it did not stop but continued and changed, extending into something that might have been a word or might have been a trick of air moving through a compromised structure. Kara could not make it resolve into language. But it was not simply mechanical. It had a quality of direction, as though it were aimed, as though it knew they were there. "Okay," Danny said. "Okay, let's—" But the second sound started before he finished the sentence. This one was different in character, sharper, more percussive. A knock, 3 of them, evenly spaced, coming from the floor. From below the floor, from whatever was below the floor, the storm cellar, Kara said. The words left her mouth before she thought them. "We need to leave," Marcus said, and his voice had dropped the careful steadiness and become simply his voice, stripped of the performance of calm, and hearing it without the performance was more frightening to Kara than the knocking had been, because Marcus did not scare. "Someone could be trapped in there," Kara said. "Or something is in there that we don't want to open," Marcus said. "Kara, I mean this. We need to leave. Now. What if there's a person in a storm cellar in 1989 at a property that was investigated by the county sheriff and the Texas Rangers in 1984? Nobody is trapped down there. Nothing good is down there." Kara looked at Danny. Danny was looking at the floor. "Storm cellar entrance," he said, "would be outside or through the kitchen. Old houses like this, they put it through the back of the kitchen." "Daniel," Marcus said, "I'm just saying where it would be." The kitchen was at the back of the house, down the stairs, and through a short hallway past the parlor. It had been a working kitchen once, and the evidence of that was everywhere in the bones of the room. The cast-iron pump handle above the empty sink basin. The outline of where a wood stove had stood burned into the linoleum, the row of rusted hooks along one wall where pots and tools had hung. There was a table still, or rather the frame of a table, its legs solid enough, its top warped and split into 2 pieces that had been pushed into something like their original configuration, as though the last person to leave had tried to set things right before they went. In the corner of the kitchen, half concealed behind the displacement of an ancient refrigerator that had been dragged from its original position and left at an angle, whether by investigators or by the passage of time or by some third agency that none of them wanted to name, was a door. Not a full door, a cellar door set, flush into the floor about 2 feet by 3, with an iron ring handle that sat in its recess without rust, because iron rings of this type don't tend to rust when they are used regularly, and this one had been moved within recent enough memory that its socket was still clean. Kara was the first to see it. She stood over it and looked at it and did not say anything for a moment. "Someone's been using this," she said, "recently." Marcus was beside her immediately. He looked at the ring. He looked at the door frame, where the accumulated grime of years of disuse had been disturbed around the edges, a telltale line where something had been opened and closed enough times to leave a trail. "We're leaving," he said. "I'm not asking. We're leaving right now." But the sound started again. This time it was directly below their feet. Not the rhythmic groan from upstairs, not the 3 knocks. A different sound entirely, high and thin and persistent, the way wind sounds in a chimney, except that there was no chimney here and no wind anywhere in the breathless July night, and the sound had the specific acoustic quality of something that was very close to language and not quite arriving there, like a person trying to speak through water, like a voice that had been at it for a very long time and was running low on whatever voices run low on. All 3 of them stepped back from the cellar door. The sound stopped. The silence that followed it was the worst kind, the waiting kind. Then, from behind them, from the front of the house, from outside, the sound of the truck's engine turning over. Danny's head snapped around. "What the hell?" The engine fired and held, and the headlights came on. They could see the glow of them through the kitchen window, illuminating the overgrown yard in front of the house, and then the engine revved once sharply, and they heard the tires on the packed dirt and the crunch of gravel, and then the sound of the truck moving away from them, diminishing, its transmission shifting through gears, the engine note dropping with distance until it was gone entirely. The 3 of them stood in the dark kitchen of the Pruett farmhouse, Kara's flashlight the only light anywhere, and listened to the sound of their one way out of this place driving itself away down the dirt road toward the county highway. The silence that followed was complete. "The brake was off," Danny said. He said it twice, and both times it sounded like something he was trying to believe, rather than something he already did. "I must have left it in neutral, and the slope. There's a slope on that drive. You felt it when we came in." "You left it in neutral," Marcus said. "I might have, with the engine running. I turned the engine off. I know I turned the engine off. Danny's voice stopped. He looked at his hands as though they belonged to someone he'd just met. The keys are in the truck, Kara said. Yes. So even if we catch up to it, it won't have gone far. The road curves, there's that fence line, it'll have coasted to a stop. But Danny didn't move toward the door. Nobody moved. The sound from below the cellar door had not resumed. The silence was being maintained now with what felt like effort from both sides of the door. Kara looked at the ring handle. Don't, Marcus said. What if someone needs help? You heard that sound. That is not a person who needs help. That is not a person at all. Marcus, listen to me. He put his hands on her shoulders and turned her to face him, and his voice was the steadiest it had been all night, which was its own signal. I am telling you not to open that door. I have never told you not to do something in 6 years of knowing you. I'm telling you now. Kara looked at him. She looked at the cellar door. She looked back at him. She knelt down and took the iron ring in her hand. Kara, his voice broke on the second syllable. She pulled. The door was heavier than she expected, and it came up in a rush of cold air that was shocking in its contrast to the dead warmth of the kitchen. Genuinely cold. The kind of cold that exists in places below the frost line, in places where the earth keeps its own temperature regardless of the season above. The smell that came with it was the smell of clay and moisture and something else, something organic and old and beyond naming, like the smell of history if history had a body. Below the door, a set of wooden steps descended into the absolute dark. The flashlight found the stairs, found the dirt floor at the bottom, found the low ceiling of the cellar. It was a small space, perhaps 10 feet by 12, with rough-hewn walls and a packed earth floor and the remains of wooden shelving on 2 walls that had once held canned goods, judging by the rusted lids and the stains where the cans had sweated against the wood for decades. There were other things on the floor, pushed to the perimeter, old feed sacks, a coil of rope, a metal bucket with a hole in it. The space appeared to be empty. Kara let out a breath, and then Marcus, standing behind her with his hand on her shoulder, said, "The door." She turned the cellar door which she had propped against the refrigerator, which she was certain she had propped against the refrigerator, had swung back to its closed position. Not slammed, just settled closed. The way a weighted door does when its counterbalance reasserts itself. She looked at the ring handle on their side. This side, the underside of the door, also had a ring handle, which was normal for a storm cellar. You needed to be able to open it from inside in case you were sheltering during a storm. She reached up and pulled. The door did not move. She pulled harder, with both hands, and then Danny was beside her, pulling with her, and then Marcus, and the door remained exactly where it was, neither locked from the outside. There was no lock, simply immovable, as though the earth above had shifted its weight onto it, as though the house had sat down. The 3 of them stood in the cold of the Pruett storm cellar and looked up at the closed door. Then the sound started again. It was not above them this time. It was not the wind or the knocking or the voice that was not quite a voice. It was a new sound, and it came from the walls, from within the walls, from behind the earthen walls of the cellar itself, and it was the sound of settling, of something deep underground rearranging itself, of the slow movement of compacted soil, and at first Kara thought it was structural, the house finally deciding to give up some portion of itself until she realized that the sound had a pattern, that it was happening in intervals, that the intervals were regular, like breathing, not the breathing of a person. Larger than that, slower, the breathing of something that measured its breaths in years rather than seconds, something that had been breathing at this interval since before the house was built, before the land was parceled and sold and farmed and abandoned and parceled again, something that had been here when this was just earth and sky, and the particular silence of the place that existed before human beings arrived to fill it with their noise. Kara had her tape recorder running. She remembered this distantly, the way you remember a decision you made hours ago when the circumstances have changed so completely that the decision seems to belong to a different version of you. Marcus sat down on the dirt floor of the cellar, not in defeat. He sat with his back against the wall and drew his knees up and put his face in his hands for a moment, and then he lifted his face and looked at Kara with an expression that was the most honest expression she had ever seen on another human being's face. It was not fear exactly. It was the look of someone who has been presented with evidence that overturns a belief they have built their identity on, and who is deciding in real time how to reorganize themselves around the new fact. "There's something in the ground," he said. "Yes," Kara said, "not Pruett." "No. Before Pruett. Maybe what made Pruett." She said it quietly. She didn't know where it came from. Danny had sat down too, with his back against the stairs. He was looking at the dirt floor. His uncle's truck was somewhere on a gravel road outside, sitting where it had rolled to a stop, and his uncle was sleeping in the cab of his own truck 12 miles away. And neither of these facts was available to help them at the moment. The breathing of the earth continued, slow, enormous, patient. "My tape recorder," Kara said. "If I've got enough tape left." She looked at it. The counter was still running. "It's still going." She held it out to the center of the cellar. "If someone finds this?" "Don't say that," Danny said. "I'm not saying it like that. I'm saying if we're down here for a while and someone comes looking. That could be days. I know. Nobody knows we're here. I know that too." The three of them looked at each other in the yellow-white beam of the flashlight. Kara's hand holding it was completely steady. She registered this and was surprised by it. She had expected her hands to shake. She had expected to feel more like screaming. But what she actually felt was something closer to clarity, the particular narrowing of attention that happens when there is exactly one thing to focus on and every other option has been removed. The breathing slowed further, if that was possible. If it had not simply changed to an interval so long that what felt like silence was actually the pause between, then it shifted, not louder, not closer, but somehow more directed, the same way that the sound upstairs had seemed to know they were there. The breathing below the floor of the cellar now seemed to be addressing them, not threatening, not even aware of them in the way that a predator is aware of prey. More the way that a very old building becomes aware of the people inside it, registering their weight and warmth as a change in its own condition. Danny said, "I think we need to talk about what?" Kara said. "About anything, I think." He stopped. "I think it likes when we talk. I think that's why it—" He stopped again. "That's why what?" Marcus said. "That's why we're here." The breathing pulsed. A long, slow influx. A long, slow release. Kara understood it before he finished. Not fully, not in words she could put in sequence, but in the way you understand the end of a story when you are still 3 chapters from it. Some structural recognition, the shape of the thing becoming visible before the details do. The land was alone. It had always been alone. The county road and the farmhouse and Raymond Earl Pruett and the 9 people he'd brought here and the investigators who'd come after and the decades of solitude since. All of it had passed over this ground the way weather passes over ground, leaving residue but no company. The breathing in the earth was the breathing of something that had no way to be heard except by those rare and reckless few who cared enough or were foolish enough to come looking. "We're not in danger," Kara said. She said it to herself first and then to the others. "We're guests. Guests who can't leave," Marcus said. "Guests who haven't knocked yet," she said. She set the tape recorder on the dirt floor, in the center of the cellar, still running. Then she sat down beside it, and Danny sat beside her, and after a moment Marcus unfolded himself from his own wall and came and sat down with them, the 3 of them forming a loose triangle in the dark with the flashlight on its side between them and the tape recorder at the center. Above them, through the earth, through the boards of the floor, through the structure of a house that had stood through everything, through summer after summer and the terrible winter of 1983, and the night they'd taken Raymond Earl Pruett away in handcuffs, and the silence that had ruled this road since above them the July sky was full of stars that nobody was looking at below them. The breathing of the earth filled the cellar like something finally given room. They talked. There was nothing else to do, and so they talked about school, and about Marcus's plan to study architecture in Houston, and about the girl Danny had been trying to ask to homecoming since March, about Kara's mother's illness, and how strange it was to come home every day not knowing which version of the house you'd find, and whether the hard days or the easy days were worse, because the easy days ended, about the dream Marcus had 3 nights running, where he was in a building that had no exits but kept finding new rooms and not minding the finding of them, about what they were afraid of and what they wanted and what they thought the world would look like when they were 30. They talked, and the breathing in the earth moved around them like water finding its level, and the night went on. At some point Kara noticed that the flashlight battery had died, and they were talking in absolute darkness and that this had not stopped them. She did not mention it. At some other point later, much later, when the quality of the silence above them changed, Danny said, "I think it's almost morning." "How do you know?" Marcus said. "I don't. I just think so." A silence, not the breathing kind, a different one. Kara held very still. Then the cellar door opened. Not in a rush, not all at once. It rose slowly with the deliberateness of something that has made a decision after a very long time, and the pale gray light that fell down the stairs and across the dirt floor was the light of very early morning, an hour before full dawn, when the sky is the color of old pewter and the birds are just beginning to make their preliminary inquiries into the new day. The three of them sat in the growing light and looked at each other and then at the open door above them. The breathing had stopped. Whether it had stopped recently, or whether it had stopped hours ago and they hadn't noticed, Kara couldn't say. She picked up the tape recorder. Still running. She clicked it off. They climbed the stairs one at a time, Danny first, then Marcus, then Kara last, pausing at the top to look back once at the cellar, the earthen walls, the old shelving, the dirt floor they'd sat on all night, the center of the floor where the tape recorder had been. She looked for a long moment, then she went up. The truck was where Danny had expected it, 60 yards down the gravel drive, nosed into the fence line at the curve, perfectly still, the keys in the ignition. It started on the first try. The drive back to the county highway took 7 minutes. Nobody spoke until they reached the asphalt. Then Marcus said, "What's on the tape?" Kara was quiet for a long moment. She turned the tape recorder over in her hands. The tape inside had run its full length sometime in the night, and auto-stopped an hour's worth of recording. "I don't know yet," she said. "When will you listen to it?" "When I'm ready." She never listened to it. Not that day, and not that week, and not that fall, when she went back to school and life reformed itself around her with its ordinary obligations. She carried the tape recorder in her bag for 2 months and then put it in the back of her desk drawer where she could not see it but knew where it was. At Christmas, she moved it to a shoebox. The shoebox moved with her through 3 apartments and 2 cities over the next decade and a half. She knew exactly where it was at all times without having to look. She became a journalist. She wrote about places and the things that happened in them. She was good at it because she understood in a way that her colleagues sometimes didn't, that the most important things that happen in a place are not always the things that can be put in sequence. She wrote about the Slaughter County killings twice in her career, in pieces that were celebrated for their restraint and their strange emotional resonance, and she never mentioned herself, never mentioned Danny or Marcus, never mentioned the night they spent in the cellar. Danny married the girl from Homecoming. They had 2 daughters. He worked in his Uncle Ray's parts supply business after Ray finally drank himself into a condition that required someone else to run things, and he proved surprisingly good at it, methodical, patient, willing to sit with a problem until it resolved. He thought about that night more than he expected to over the years, and less than he feared to. He thought about it the way you think about a thing that happened to you before you knew who you were, not with clarity, but with the sense that it was load-bearing, structurally important, one of the reasons the rest of the building stood. Marcus studied architecture in Houston and then in New Haven, and became eventually the kind of architect who designed buildings with a specific and unusual quality. His structures tended to have rooms that opened onto other rooms in unexpected ways, extra spaces that the eye didn't account for on the blueprint, corners that seemed to contain more than their geometry allowed. His clients loved this effect and couldn't describe it. When interviewers asked him where it came from, he said something about listening to buildings. He never elaborated. The building in his dream, the one with no exits and the endless new rooms, stopped after that summer. He slept well for the rest of his life. Kara listened to the tape on a Tuesday morning in October 2019. She was 51 years old, cleaning out a storage unit after her mother's death, when she found the shoebox. She sat down on the concrete floor of the unit with her back against a shelving rack and her mother's things all around her, and she put the tape in the old recorder, the batteries long dead, but she had new ones. She had always kept new batteries for this, and pressed play. Her voice, Danny's voice, Marcus's voice, talking hours of talking in the dark, all the things they said, and she remembered it and didn't remember it simultaneously. The way you hold a dream that you know you had but cannot quite access. The shape without the detail. The tape ended. Then, in the last seconds before the auto stop engaged, a sound. Not a voice, not the breathing. Something smaller and more specific. Something that might have been that she chose to believe was the sound of the earth in that dark cellar, in the early hours of an August morning in 1989, letting out one long, slow breath. The way a person breathes after a night of good conversation, when the house has gone quiet and the guests have finally gone and they are alone again, but differently alone than they were before. She sat on the floor of the storage unit for a long time after the tape ended. The earth beneath us has been listening longer than we have been speaking. Consider what it must be like to hold within yourself the compressed memory of every footstep, every dropped thing, every body entrusted to the dark, and to have no voice capable of the asking that every living thing eventually gets around to. 3 teenagers drove into the dark to find a monster, and found instead something older, a loneliness so vast and patient, it had learned to wait. They gave it one night, and their voices, and it gave them back to themselves, changed in ways too deep to be visible, significant in ways that would take a lifetime to trace. They came looking for the Twilight Zone and found only this, that the most haunted things in the world are not the ones that can't move on. They are the ones that have been waiting all this time for someone to simply sit down and stay a while. You'll find if you ever visit the zone that we are all of us, each one, that thing in the ground.